Welcome back to session 4. Let's jump right in. Allies and enemies. Wars are often won or lost based on who we have on our side. In session 2, we said that we can't win the war against trauma alone. Our enemy in this battle is too strong and too clever to defeat by ourselves. But who is our enemy? What do they want? Why are they attacking us? Even more importantly, who are our allies who are willing to fight alongside us? There was a man named Samson who was a warrior among warriors. You can read all about him throughout the book of Judges. He was born to a woman who was unable to conceive, and an angel of the Lord appeared to her, promising that she would give birth to a son with incomparable strength and would be deeply dedicated to God. Samson's strength became apparent when he killed a lion with his bare hands at a young age.
Okay.
But his great strength gave way to weakness. Relying on his own might and power, he struggled with pride, pushed away the wise counsel of others, and often chose to do things by himself rather than letting others help. He often acted rashly in anger and also had a weakness for women. His love for a woman named Delilah led to his downfall when his enemies bribed her to betray his trust and reveal the secret of his strength. After much prodding from Delilah, Samson ultimately revealed that cutting his long hair, which was a sign of his commitment to God, would make his strength leave him. Delilah, crafty as she was, waited until he was asleep, called for someone to cut his hair, and let his enemies take him away. Unaware he had lost his strength, Samson fought back, believing that he could kill the enemies who seized him as he had done so many times before. But his strength was gone, and his enemies captured and tortured him, gouging out his eyes, binding him in prison. While in captivity, Samson's hair began to grow back, and he asked God for one last burst of strength. God granted his request, and Samson pushed apart the pillars of the temple where he was held captive, killing himself and all those inside.
Wow.
That's it. That's how his story ended. Perhaps the strongest man ever to walk the earth died alone, blind, weak, and regretful of his decisions. While this may not be the most uplifting story ever told, what lessons can we learn from Samson's life? Let's pause and discuss.
So let's take a moment now and compare Samson to another character in the Bible named David. David was a man of God and a man of war. He was a shepherd, a warrior, and a musician. He was very popular and became a hero at a young age after toppling a giant named Goliath. The victory led to his rise in prominence, and he eventually became the king of Israel. He is a central character in both Judaism and Christianity, often remembered as a great king and a leader whose kingdom prospered under his rule. David is referred to as a man after God's own heart for his close connection to the Lord. He prayed often and wrote songs of praise. In fact, many of the psalms found in the Bible are attributed to David. His peers respected him, and he had a close friend named Jonathan, who was his trusted advisor in all things. But his reign wasn't without mistakes. Like Samson, David also had a weakness for women, and even went as far as having a woman's husband killed so he could have her for his own. A prophet of God named Nathan came to David and confronted him about his sins. David listened and repented of what he had done. While his mistakes were numerous and not without consequences, he listened to wise counsel and was humble enough to admit his sins to others and to God. To this day, we remember David as the greatest king of Israel. Let's repeat the same activity, but this time with David in mind. What lessons can we learn from his life? Let's pause and discuss. Samson and David were similar in some respects. Both were true warriors and were considered great men, yet both were sinners and experienced massive downfalls. But how their lives played out in response to their sins could not have been more different. One continued to fall deeper and deeper into darkness, and the other demonstrated tremendous resilience bouncing back after significant failure. Here's a question worth asking. Are you more like Samson or David? Perhaps the most significant difference between these two men were their allies. Samson had Delilah, a manipulative, deceitful woman who betrayed his trust and handed him over to his enemies. And on the other hand, David had Jonathan and Nathan, wise friends who were loyal and honest men of God. Just like in any war, we have allies and enemies in our spiritual battle. For example, the people in the room with you right now are your allies.
Yeah, that's good.
They have your back and want you to heal. Here's another example. The person who invited you to Reboot is your ally.
That's good.
They risk feeling rejected or upsetting you because they loved you enough to lead you here.
Yeah, that's good.
Like Jonathan and Nathan, these allies are loyal, honest, and wise. But regardless of how incredible this group of allies is, you can't win a spiritual war without spiritual firepower. You have another ally who has never lost a war and doesn't plan on losing this one. And it's God. God is your ally. He is in your corner and has your back. And certainly, there are times during and after trauma that it doesn't feel that way. In fact, we may even be tempted to believe that God is the source of our pain rather than the redeemer of it. But that simply isn't true. Here's what is. God isn't the source of our trauma.
Yeah, that's right. Our trauma is the result of living in a broken world filled with hurting people who hurt other people. Christians believe that there's a spiritual being known as Satan, your enemy in this battle, who is the author of chaos, trauma, and destruction. The book of Genesis teaches that through Satan's deception of Adam and Eve, remember we talked about this the last week, I think it was, right? That sin entered the world and sin has caused trauma ever since. Ephesians 6:12 says this, it says, "For our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the world powers of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavens." 1 Peter 5:8 says this, it says, "The devil, Satan, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour." This enemy has you in his sights, and he's willing to bring the weight of the world down on your shoulders if that's what it takes. He doesn't just want to depress you or cause you some anxiety. No. He won't be satisfied until he has devoured you and you are dead. Dead spiritually, dead emotionally, dead mentally. And if he can convince you that your life will never get any better, he'll put the idea in your head to end your own life physically dead. This enemy doesn't fight fair, and he will use any vulnerability you have to strike where it hurts the most. You may have noticed that your trauma left you wanting to be alone and isolated, or maybe that it even pulled you away from God. Man, that sounds like a good strategy, doesn't it? If your enemy can isolate you away from your allies, then he has the upper hand. Now, before we go too far, we all acknowledge and we get it. The idea that there is some spiritual war going on with our souls at the center is really hard to believe and hard to fathom. It's difficult to believe that there's a real spiritual enemy who wants nothing more than to isolate us and turn us against our allies. But take a moment to examine how trauma attacks our lives. We lose our trust in others, we lose our faith in God, and we lose our hope for the future. See, these are in direct opposition to the very promises that God has made to us. He promises to give us life. He promises that he has not, as Jose said, that he has not and will not abandon us. He sends us allies to walk with us through our pain and trauma, and he promises to light a path for us when we're lost in darkness. At its core, trauma is a result of sin in the world. Disaster, disease, and decay have gripped our world, and like a rerun of a show that no one wants to watch, generation after generation turns on one another through war, through hatred and greed. Humanity steals, lies, and oppresses, and when justice comes knocking, mankind hides, and we blame God for not stopping it in the first place. Instead of seeing God as our ally, our enemy wants us to see him as this unjust, unkind, and irresponsible deity, one who sits on the throne seeing us struggle and does nothing to intervene. But what if God isn't some faraway, uninvolved deity? What if he has had his eye on you this entire time? What if God is redeeming that which was meant for evil and using it for good? If trauma is your personal intersection with the brokenness of the world, recovery is your personal intersection with the redemptive heart of God.
Let's take a moment here to begin applying what we've learned so far about trusting our allies and taking intentional steps toward healing. Here, among allies, let's take a few minutes to share a bit about the trauma that we've experienced. In 3 sentences or less, tell us about your personal intersection with the brokenness of the world, what happened and how it's impacted you. For instance, you may share, "I'm Jane Doe, and I was sexually assaulted by a superior while serving in the military. After the event, I was unable to continue serving and ended up leaving my career. Ever since then, I haven't been the same, and I feel stuck." Whatever you write will be a great first start. You know this might be difficult, but it only has to be 3 sentences, and you can share as much or as little as you like. We're going to give you some time to work on this. God can take something that seems used, broken, and damaged and repurpose it for something incredible.
That's good.
God wasn't the origin of your trauma, but he is changing the outcome of your trauma to be something beautiful. He will use the scars of your past to help tell the story of all that you've overcome. Allies and enemies, friends and foes, you aren't alone. Even when the brokenness and evil of the world flooded into your life, you weren't alone. We're here, and God is here for you right now. David was a warrior who had experienced post-traumatic stress. Throughout many of his Psalms, we read of the torment he felt because of his trauma. Listen to a reading of a song written by David found in Psalm 31, 9 through 16. "Be gracious to me, Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted away from grief, my soul and my body too. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength has failed because of my guilt, and my body has wasted away. Because of all my adversaries, I have become a disgrace, especially to my neighbors, and an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. I am forgotten like a dead person out of mind. I'm like a broken vessel, for I've heard the slander of many. Terror is on every side. While they took counsel together against me, they schemed to take away my life." Does that sound familiar? Have any of you cried your eyes out and felt hollow inside? Have your so-called friends turned against you? Are you worn out by your troubles? David sure was. And yet he was called a man after God's own heart, who ran toward his allies when trouble came. Let's look at the next portion from that psalm. "But as for me, I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from those who persecute me. Make your face shine upon your servant. Save me in your faithfulness." Let's pause again for a moment and dig into these words. How did David respond? How does his response compare to our response? Is it similar or different?
David placed his life in God's hands. He trusted that God was his ally and waited on God to redeem that which seemed irredeemable. And maybe you are trying to do that today. Maybe you are clinging to your faith by a thread. If so, you aren't alone in that either. Many of us grew up hearing Bible stories about Noah building an ark, Moses crossing the Red Sea, and David slaying Goliath. But as we have faced the Goliaths in our own lives, we have often found ourselves in situations where God didn't miraculously pull us from the hardship. Sometimes things actually got worse. This may have challenged our childhood faith and left us wondering if God even existed or heard our cries for help. But if we actually look at the majority of stories in the Bible, we find numerous people who weren't immediately delivered from their enemy or set free upon first request. Daniel was left in the lion's den. Job lost everything. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were left in the fiery furnace. Lazarus died from his illness, and Jesus was left on the cross. God can love you and let you suffer. He loved Daniel, Shadrach, and Jesus, and yet they all suffered. But in each of these stories, we find a common theme. God didn't take away the trial. He joined them in it. He didn't pull his children from the fiery furnace. Rather, he stepped inside with them. And the fire didn't affect them the same way as it would have, or the way that it did affect others.
That's right.
The same is true for you. God may not take away the symptoms and struggles that you're facing, but one thing is certain. He has joined you in them, and so have we.